Hello. This week's topic is the bureaucracy, so please read chapter 11 in the book before you answer the written question. But I wanted to talk just a bit about what the topic is. When we talk about the bureaucracy, we're really talking about the federal government. Now, a bureaucracy can exist in any large organization. A bureaucracy is an organization that has established rules for how things are done. It has a hierarchy. It has established roles for people working in the organization, and it can be a very efficient way for conducting business. So, for example, not only is the federal government a bureaucracy, but so is the state of Michigan, so is the city government for where you live, and so would be the college, Henry Ford College. We have a bureaucracy as well. But the largest bureaucracy in the United States is the federal bureaucracy. There are quite a few people who work in the federal government, over a million, maybe 1.5 to 2 million people work for the federal government in some capacity. Now, this is not including the people who serve in the military. They're not considered to be part of the broader bureaucracy. But certainly postal carriers, the people who deliver our mail, the people who work in federal agencies, and so forth are part of the bureaucracy. Now, in the reading, you'll see that the bureaucracy is divided up into different types, and I don't want to go through every type of bureaucracy or every example that exists in the federal government, but I did want to talk about a couple of them. The main part of the federal government is the executive departments. There are 15 executive departments. The leaders of those departments are called secretaries generally, although the Department of Justice is led by the Attorney General. But the head of every other executive department is called secretary of whatever department she or he leads. So, for example, the head of the Department of State is the Secretary of State. Now, I should mention that the Secretary of State at the federal level is different from the Secretary of State at the state level here in Michigan or another state. The U.S. Department of State, for example, handles foreign policy, and it is considered to be kind of the senior department of the executive branch. Now, usually we refer to the executive departments as cabinet departments. The term cabinet goes back to the time of George Washington. He called his principal advisors his cabinet, and so that name has kind of stuck to the departments. So you'll hear that term used a lot in the media. And they are the main departments of the federal government. So the Department of Defense is our military. There's a Federal Department of Education, which administers federal money for education, both K-12 and higher ed, and also rules that regulate education. The Department of Treasury is who you pay your income taxes to. The IRS is part of the Department of Treasury. Department of Commerce handles trade issues, and so forth. So those are the principal departments of the federal government. But as you'll see in the reading, there are some tasks that the government carries out that can be better handled by a specific agency or something that's not part of a department. So, for example, we have independent agencies like the CIA, which handle intelligence gathering, or you also have another example would be NASA, the space agency. It is its own independent agency. When it was created back in the 1950s, Congress thought it would be better for space policy to be handled by an independent agency because it's a very specific task. You also have regulatory agencies, which are very important parts of the federal government. So, for example, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, regulates the environment, obviously. It enforces the environmental laws that Congress passes. You also have OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. That's the agency that's responsible for workplace safety regulation. They issue rules to enforce the laws on workplace safety. And so you have several regulatory agencies that exist. And another type of agency that exists in the federal government are those that are independent, but they regulate. So an example would be the Federal Reserve Board. The Federal Reserve Board is the body that regulates our money, actually, the money supply in the United States. They set the prime interest rate, so interest rates can have a big impact on whether banks, on the rate that banks charge when they loan money to you. If the economy is slowing down in a recession, the Federal Reserve Board will cut interest rates, which will stimulate the commercial banks to loan more money because they will charge less interest, and people are more likely to borrow money, which the idea there is to stimulate the economy. And alternatively, when there's high inflation, when prices are going up, the Federal Reserve Board will raise interest rates to discourage people from borrowing money. So those are a few of the agencies. There are others discussed in the book, but please make sure you read through that. I also wanted to talk just a minute about employment in the federal government. So in order to get most of the over a million or almost 2 million people who work in the federal government are people who get their jobs through civil service, through the merit system. And that's discussed in this chapter. But most federal employees are not political appointments. They actually get their jobs because they're qualified to do it. They take an exam. They have to go through a competitive interview process. They also have to have set credentials to fill the job. And there are levels of service. So at the lower levels, you make less money and you need fewer credentials. At the higher levels, you make more money, but you also need more credentials, more education, or more job experience. But the idea is that this is a very good way to run a government because you have competent people doing these jobs. They're not doing them based on politics. They're doing them based on the fact that they're qualified and they have demonstrated competence in that area. So it is how the federal government has operated for well over 100 years now. Certainly, at one time, in the reading, you'll notice that back in the 1800s, a lot of people got their jobs through political patronage. They were appointed to jobs because they had supported the president in his election, and a lot of these people had no business working in the federal government. They simply got their jobs because of politics. And by the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, a new idea developed that people should get their jobs based on competence, not based on politics. Now, there are political appointees in the federal government. Those would be the leaders of departments and agencies. So when a new president takes over, he or she gets the opportunity to appoint the heads of departments and agencies, and those heads have to be confirmed by the Senate. So they are political appointees. They are people who do support the president politically. And that's about 10% of the federal bureaucracy. But again, 90% of the federal jobs go to people based on experience, and those people cannot be terminated by a president or by the heads of their departments. They can only be terminated if they're not doing their job adequately, and there is a due process provision in their contracts, which means that they can't just be arbitrarily fired. They have to be fired with cause and following a set process. So in any event, that is some information on the federal bureaucracy. Please make sure you read the chapter very carefully, and if you have any questions, please email me. And have a great week. Thank you.